Hello and welcome to another edition of Political Insider. I'm your host, Herald-Tribune political editor Zac Anderson. With me today is Frank Alcock, a political science professor at New College of Florida. Professor, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me back.
Always good to see you. A lot of developments this week in presidential politics, especially. On Tuesday, there were 5 states that voted, and Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump did really well. Clinton won 4 out of the 5, Trump won 5 out of the 5. Let's start with the Democratic contest. A lot of people are saying at this point that Clinton pretty much has this thing wrapped up, and yet Sanders remains in the race. Why is he still in it? What's he trying to achieve? What do you think his contribution has been to this race so far?
On the Democratic side, it is for the most part wrapped up. Mathematically, It's not a matter of sort of slowing Hillary's pace or even winning all the remaining states. Sanders would have to win them by ridiculous margins. So what does he want? Well, he wants his political revolution to succeed.
Yeah.
And I think
how does that happen at this point?
Well, I think it's. I would hope to see him, pivot in that. The revolution shouldn't be solely focused on the top of the ticket.
Right.
So he has a clear agenda that he wants, and I guess he thinks that the longer that he stays in, I think it continues to give him some leverage. The Hillary Clinton camp certainly needs Bernie supporters and Bernie himself if they're going to be successful in the general election. And so, but after the results this past week, I would be surprised if the tone didn't change, if it became obvious that even if it's not an explicit agreement that they're a mutually reinforcing tone, and the guns are directed at Donald Trump, not at one another.
So he might push for things like Wall Street reform or other things in the Democratic platform going into the convention?
Yeah, I think that's what he'll be doing in terms of explicit commitments for Hillary or implicit commitments for the Hillary camp about things that he wants in the platform, or the most important things to him that it'll kind of remain at the top of her priority list.
Okay. And on the Republican side, we saw just an overwhelming victory for Trump in these 5 states. He won every county, every congressional district in these states, just total dominant performance. A lot of people are saying that maybe he also has this nomination within his grasp. Is this a foregone conclusion that Trump is going to get this? And if so, what do you think about a Trump versus Clinton matchup?
He's surging again, so the probability of him clinching is increasing. The rules are a little bit different on the Republican side.
Sure.
The math is a little bit different, and so for his trajectory right now, a lot of it hinges on Indiana, in part because it's a winner-take-all for a big portion of them, and then winner-take-all in some of the congressional districts.
Right.
It's a state that has 57 delegates that. A swing of 5 to 7 points between him and Cruz could mean almost all of those 57 delegates.
Kind of amazing that a state like Indiana, which hasn't really even been relevant in these primaries in the past, is now potentially hinges on whether Trump could get the nomination.
If Trump wins in Indiana and gets the bulk of the delegate haul there and maintains the margins that he has in polls in California, he will wrap this thing up before the first vote. If he stumbles just a little bit, though, if somehow Ted Cruz recovers with his Hail Mary to Carly Fiorina, somehow pulls out Indiana or cuts into his Trump's margins in California, if Trump is kept from that 1237 by, say, 50 vote, then it starts to get really interesting, because if he does not lock this down on the first vote at the convention, then I think Ted Cruz has really lined up his delegates there. And so it's still a little bit more interesting on the Republican side, but I think the most likely scenario is going to be a Clinton versus Trump matchup, and oh my goodness. It's going to be ugly. It's going to be real ugly.
Well, let's turn to Florida politics a little bit here. There were some developments in the state. We saw Bill Nelson, the Democratic senator, was tossed out as a potential vice presidential pick for Clinton. Some people were surprised by that he's older, he's white, he wouldn't bring a lot of diversity to the ticket. He doesn't really seem to complement and bring things that Clinton doesn't have. What are your thoughts? I mean, is he an unusual pick?
After the election's over, I can see the logic for a Clinton administration in terms of having a seasoned pro like Bill Nelson, who doesn't really aspire to become president. In terms of a ticket, though, oh my God, can you be any less exciting?
Bill Nelson is kind of known for being a little bit more reserved. He's not, kind of this dynamic sort of rah-rah type of politician.
In part, I think Hillary does certainly. She has high negatives and she has some weaknesses, and so I think that she'll choose somebody else to try to shore up some of those weaknesses. Somebody a little younger, somebody brings more excitement, somebody that's a bit more appealing to progressives base in the Hillary, in the Bernie camp.
So you see somebody more like Julian Castro, who spoke to the Sarasota Democrats at their annual dinner earlier this year, and is considered, he's Hispanic, younger.
Somebody with a profile like that. He's taken some flack for some of the HUD policies, so his, I think, stock's dropping down a little bit, but somebody with a similar profile, I think, to that. A little bit of balance to Hillary, not really sort of doubling down on her strengths.
Okay, well, we'll see what goes with that. Sticking with the U.S. Senate, Carlos Baruf, a Manatee County homebuilder who is running for the Senate seat being vacated by Marco Rubio, made some controversial remarks earlier this week. He said that people from the Middle East there should be a temporary ban on any immigrants from those countries until we can be certain that no terrorists are slipping through. He did make an exception for Israel, saying he thinks that their security policies are pretty strong. This is very reminiscent of something that Donald Trump said.
I don't know if he could be any less obvious. Maybe he could paint his hair orange and start practicing the facial contortions.
You think that he's like, this is very an obvious effort to sort of emulate Trump. And the interesting thing is that Trump got a lot of blowback for his comments. Paul Ryan said that this is not who we are as Republicans. This is not conservatism.
Right.
And but when you look at exit polls from Florida and other states, a lot of grassroots Republicans do support this. They are very concerned about terrorists coming over to the U.S.
Yeah, well, I think Carlos Baruf's strategy is quite clear. He has somewhat a similar profile to Rick Scott or a Donald Trump in certain ways, and that's where he is. That's where he's going. He's the little Trump of Florida, I think, is how he's positioning himself in this race. Yeah. I don't necessarily think that would hurt him in the primary, and it might be the most plausible path for him to become the nominee for the Senate seat. I think it can be very damaging in the general election. I'm sure the Democrats would love to see.
Does that seem difficult, though? I mean, isn't Trump sort of a singular personality, trying to emulate his sort of braggadocio, his sort of anti-establishment? I mean, you can do it, but do you run some risks?
I think so. I mean, I don't know. I've never seen anybody pull this off. What Trump is pulling off. For somebody to try to become the little Trump of Florida, there's a lot of baggage that comes with that rhetoric and those positions. And then again, if it's not as authentic as the vintage Trump, then you get a reaction which is, I know Donald Trump, and you're no Donald Trump. And so there are some risks with the strategy that Baruf is taking.
We'll see how it plays out.
Yeah.
We'll leave it there. Thank you again for joining me.
Thanks, Zac.
Thanks for being here for another edition of Political Insider. Please tune in again next week.